Hello, everyone. So we are continuing with lesson 30, lecture 2, discussing the reign of Augustus's first heir and successor on the imperial throne, Tiberius. After Augustus died and Tiberius came to power, he had undertaken a number of actions that can really give us a good insight into the nature of imperial power under Augustus's heirs. And the first of those sets of actions concerned the establishment of something called treason trials. And to understand this better, let us take a quick look at the assigned reading from Tacitus's Annals, section 172. And it offers a very interesting contrast in the first and the second parts of this section that we are going to now take a quick look at. So Tiberius, we learn from Tacitus, rejected the title father of his country, though it had been repeatedly pressed upon him by the people, and disregarding a vote of the Senate, he refused to allow the taking of an oath to obey his enactments. So what's interesting about this is that many of the emperors we will see will keep saying things like, no, I don't want more power. So there will be a lot of excusing themselves and saying they're not interested in having too much power. So that might make you think, oh, that's kind of nice. But let's see how this was seen by contemporaries. Yet even so he made those refusals. He failed to inspire the belief that his sentiments were not monarchical, for he had resuscitated the law of treason, a statute which in the old jurisprudence had carried the same name but covered a different type of offense. Let's just stop there for a moment. So he failed to inspire belief that his sentiments were not monarchical. Essentially, individuals start to think about the Roman emperors as kings. And as you might recall, being a king is a bad thing in the Roman context. And so this is interesting how these various actions start to develop an idea of the emperor essentially acting like a king. So let's find out about this law of treason, which is a key part of this. So in the old times, this had a different type of, it covered a different type of offense: betrayal of an army, seditious incitement of the populace, any act in short of official maladministration diminishing the majesty of the Roman nation. Deeds were challenged, words went immune. So what happens here is that we find out that the law of treason, in fact, is an older law. It has been around for some time, but usually it only concerns certain kinds of actions that essentially somehow undermined a major undertaking by Rome, right? Not an individual, but like by the whole unity of Rome. So betrayal of an army, or seditious incitement, or something, maladministration on a large scale. That's the kind of thing that treason was qualified as. Now something changes. The first to take cognizance of written libel under the statute was Augustus. So what happens here is that Augustus is the first one who will start to say, well, actually, if you say something bad about me, that also qualifies under the law of treason. He, Augustus, was provoked to the step by the effrontery with which a certain Cassius Severus had blackened the characters of men and women of repute in his scandalous effusions, right? So people said some not so nice things, right, about Augustus and about some other people close to him. And so he was like, no, actually, that should be punishable under the law of treason. Let's see what Tiberius does. Tiberius, to an inquiry put by the praetor Pompeius Macer whether process should still be granted on this statute, replied that the law ought to take its course. And you see how that's a quotation, right? So he said, this is a law, we have to do it. He too had been ruffled by verses of unknown authorship, satirizing his cruelty, his arrogance, and his estrangement from his mother. So we find out that Tiberius essentially says, no, I want this law to continue and I want to use it. And in fact, he will be the one who will start to use it on a much bigger scale. So this traditional idea that treason was the diminution of the majesty of the Roman people, which is very communal, right? And it has to do with the whole community, now changed in light of imperial rule. So conspiracies against the emperor now fell under this law. But it also started to include all kinds of other things, such as adultery. Okay, that clearly they like to legislate that kind of thing. but also libel and slander. And without the law ever being redrafted, often it ended up that the charges were quite vague. So it's not so much that we have a law and then they sort of very carefully modify it, but instead that this name, the law of treason, will become sort of this get out of jail free card, except it's the opposite, right? It's a joker, right? It's like the card that you can use for any kind of situation if you want to get rid of someone and you're the emperor. The proceedings, so this was kind of legalistically performed. The proceedings could be ruled by the emperor, by a special court, but the established trial norms could be disregarded. So for example, it might be okay to charge and question as witnesses slaves, which traditionally was not thought of, and torture was acceptable even for those with free status. Again, usually they would not torture free people. They might torture a slave. I know it's horrible, but that was their sort of attitude. So what we see here is that essentially the law of treason, it's not extrajudicial insofar as there is sort of this semblance of law, but it is in fact leaving behind quite a few legal traditions of Roman rule. Taking it even a step further, Tiberius also charged a particular historian under this law. And this is the second section I asked you to read from Tacitus's Annals. So the consulate of Cornelius Cossus and Asinius Agrippa opened with the prosecution of Cremutius Cordus upon the novel, until then unheard of charge of publishing a history. Oh gosh, I didn't know I had such a dangerous job. Eulogizing Brutus and styling Cassius as the last of the Romans, right? So Cremutius Cordus, this Roman senator, writes a history and publishes it, in which he says Brutus and Cassius were, in fact, really great men. So after he is accused, he goes to the Senate and he tries to defend himself, and this is what he has to say. Conscript fathers, this is what he says to the fellow senators. My words are brought to your judgment, so guiltless am I of deeds, right? We see this distinction again. It's about words, not deeds. Nor are they even words against the sole persons embraced by the law of treason, the sovereign or the parent of the sovereign. I am said to have praised Brutus and Cassius, whose acts so many pens have recorded, whom not one has mentioned save with honor. So the point he says, this is absolutely weird. I did not say anything bad about Tiberius, not even say Tiberius's mother, Livia, but simply I praised someone that Augustus disliked. And so this is why I am counted under the law of treason. So Cremutius Cordus realizes that, in fact, in light of how imperial power is evolving, he has no chance of winning his case. So he left the Senate and closed his life by self-starvation. Rough way to go. And sort of the situation doesn't even end there, because we find out from Tacitus that the fathers ordered his books to be burned by the aediles, but copies remained hidden and afterwards published, a fact which moves us the more to deride the folly of those who believe that by an act of despotism in the present, there can be extinguished also the memory of a succeeding age. That is Tacitian commentary, of course. But what's important to us is that essentially Roman emperors develop now the kind of power in which, words, so not just actions, but words can be considered as part of this law of treason. And so if you're saying anything bad about the emperor, or even just saying something good about someone who is long dead but was against Augustus, that could count against you. And then this idea that you can kill ideas by burning books, I think further adds to this sense that the emperors essentially, or their rule was really taking a turn for lack of freedom of speech, and really struggling with opinions that disagreed with the imperial perspective. Okay, so that's one, the law of treason. Number two is the beginnings of military control in Rome. So we know that Augustus established a special group of soldiers called the Praetorian Guard as essentially the emperor's bodyguard. But what's happening under Tiberius is twofold. Namely, on the one hand, we will see that the head of this bodyguard under Tiberius, it's Sejanus, will gain quite a bit of power. They will become quite powerful. And I think this is something where we will see sort of the element of violence now increasingly playing a bigger and bigger role. And often these heads of the Praetorian Guard will be involved in both the killing of previous emperors and the making of new emperors in the first century of the Roman Empire. So that's one piece, the head of the bodyguard getting very powerful. But secondly, also, under Tiberius, there are special barracks built for the Praetorian Guard on the boundary of the city. So if you look at this map for a second, here is Rome in this period, and most of life happens right here in the middle. And traditionally, you recall that Rome's walls were considered sacred, and so you were not supposed to come into Rome with weapons, right? So that kind of clashes with this idea of the Praetorian Guard as in running around in Rome protecting the emperor. So what happens under Tiberius is it's sort of this he's really on the fence, if you wish, and he builds right here a camp for these soldiers, right? So it's not quite inside Rome, it's not really outside of Rome. So right here on the wall, he builds this camp. And so from this point onwards, it's really the Praetorian Guard is available and around the city of Rome to support imperial rule, which is certainly an element of militarization of power, and it further enhances the power of individuals such as Sejanus, the head of the Praetorian Guard, who in fact, as Tiberius's rule progresses, will have more and more power. And if you look on the handout, you can see that he is actually quite powerful as soon as Tiberius comes to power in the year 14. He is appointed as Praetorian prefect, and he will in fact stay in power until 31, which is a very generous 17 years of power. I also wanted to mention a few other incidents that are mentioned on the handout. Importantly, there is Germanic, of course, the death of Germanicus, for which then somebody, a Roman senator, will be tried and forced to commit suicide. And then in 25, the suicide of Cremutius Cordus. But also we see that in 29, Tiberius's mother Livia dies. And I think we get a good sense of even more familial conflict when Agrippina the Elder, a female family member, and her young son, who is going to become the Emperor Nero later on, are exiled at this time. So there is one more point that's really worth mentioning here, is that in the year 26, which is incidentally the same year in which Pontius Pilate, the famous one from the Bible, who is responsible for the death of Jesus, in that same year that he became governor of Judea, Tiberius does something rather unexpected, which is that he chooses at that point to retire to the island of Capri. Now, I strongly encourage everyone to go to the island of Capri. It's absolutely beautiful, fantastic. It's off the shore of essentially close to Naples, a little bit further south. And he builds up a beautiful palace there, and Tiberius essentially just lives there for 11 years of his rule. And I think you could definitely argue that this had something to do with him being sort of sick of the nature of power in Rome or something like that. But I think it had larger consequences, such as with the emperor's absence from Rome, powerful underlings, such as Sejanus, actually could become super powerful. In fact, that is what happened. And after Tiberius retired to the island of Capri, Sejanus became more and more powerful. At a certain point, he thought he would want to become a senator. Maybe he was even fantasizing about becoming emperor after Tiberius dies. So things were really starting to get out of hand. And thus, in the year 31 then, in which he actually was consul, along with Tiberius figured the deal out and got rid of him. But nevertheless, the late rule of Tiberius, these years, essentially over a decade that he spent away from Rome, really shows us how much sort of imperial rule is sort of completely different now. And it's certainly changing into a direction in which treason trials, soldiers in the streets of Rome, and powerful underlings are playing increasingly larger and larger roles. And that is the problem that Tiberius's heir will face after he dies in the year 37. And that is where the last lecture of lesson 30 will pick up.